Hey friends, welcome back to BIMvoice. Today I have the pleasure to talk to Ole Marius Svensson, and we are going to cover a topic that I did not talk too much on BIMvoice. Hi, Ole Marius, welcome. I'm very happy to have you here.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for accepting my invitation. And now, what do you do? Let's start with, with that. What are we going to talk about today?
I am an engineer by heart, so what I do and provide is environmentalist analysis for buildings of all variety, dwellings, office spaces, etc. So one of the main tasks I heavily emphasize on is access to natural daylight. Another part would also be thermal comfort studies, but also energy consumption, as all of these is quite natural fitting into each other. To have more natural light, you need to have more window space. More window space means you have more heat loss. More heat loss means you have to provide more energy to heat up the dwelling. So that is my specialty. So in short, also, we work quite close with any architectural firm, as it is a dance you need to have with architects and also the engineers with the necessity know how to do these environmentalist analytic studies.
Interesting. So let me ask you something. When you decided to niche on this specific thing you are doing right now, did you have insight at all the global focus on the sustainability, the focus in the European Union and Europe in general on this, or you just start to do some things related to this and you thought, okay, this is cool, I want to go on this?
Well, if you take first the interest into the UN sustainability goals, that is partially due to my first job as president position for the Engineer Student Union in Norway, where we emphasize heavily on the impact of these STEM studies into resolving and assisting how to meet the UN sustainability goals. For the question about how I ended up with a profession that actually works with this, that is mostly due to my upbringing, where I had access to National Geographic Channel and saw mega construction and thought wow, that looks really interesting. But how I ended up with construction into now an environmental study, that is quite a happy accident. COVID came around, just finished my studies, and one of the startup companies in Norway had a need for an engineer student who has some training into environmental studies. So that's how I ended up having 1 foot on both of those topics.
That's interesting. Okay. And that's how you started your career. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yes, you also just a bit of background on this. I started to notice you on LinkedIn after engaging in some conversations about BlenderBIM. I was very surprised to see that you are using to some degree. Now you are going to tell me to what degree. I think not only Blender, right? Is BlenderBIM.
Yeah, I use mostly BlenderBIM, and the reason is that one of the main softwares we in my company are using, we need to have obstructional elements to either perform daylight studies or thermal comfort studies, where you need to have shaded objects to prevent sun reaching to a certain point in the facade. If you have something on the roof that obstructs the free access to the sun, you do need to have that in your software. So we in the company, we used SketchUp and still are using SketchUp to import your IFC file format, which we receive from any architect firm, and pick these elements into a 3ds file. Unfortunately, the 3ds file for IDA-ICE, which is the environmentally study software we use, the 3ds file is a bit too heavy to run inside the IDA-ICE. And then I found out that by using BlenderBIM, you can get easy access to the IFC files, get easy access to the obstructional elements, and then you convert those elements into OBJ file format. So it's a much more intuitive way for me to get those files, and I can have even more elements into the IDA-ICE software. But also, one of the things I did discover with use of BlenderBIM is that unlike SketchUp, you first run it through SimpleBIM, like yet another tool to quickly select a few items you want, then into SketchUp, then into a 3ds file, as opposed as BlenderBIM. it is plug and play. You select the type of files and abstraction elements you want to use and just export them. At times, also, I find in energy calculations for buildings, when you have decline or angle walls, it can at times also be hard to find what is the internal surface of that wall. So if you use IFC file format in combination with blueprint, there's always angles to consider. So for me, I found it to be far more easy to get those square meters also for energy calculation by just select the facades or internal elements and use the internal structure of Blender to click and select the surface. And here you have the needed square meters instead of going a long process. And recently I also discovered that Blender has yet another plugin called VI Suits, and I've been playing around a little bit, which do offer some of the environmental studies within daylight studies. And it works quite well. So I'm hoping we can maybe use that software and that plugin in combination with BlenderBIM far more in the future, as it cuts down the entire process of exporting, importing, building up run test cases.
Wow, that's amazing. Are you still using, by the way, SimpleBIM, or you gave up completely on it?
No, I do still use it from time to time. The reason there is when we are using the main software, which is IDEs, we still have to rely heavily on the IFC file format. But within the file format, you have a lot of elements which you do not need for environmental studies, such as ducts, shears, plumbing, tubes. So we use then the SimpleBIM to filter out all of these elements. So we have a more like cleaner form of IFC file format we can then import into the IDEs. If BlenderBIM suddenly had like the same plugin where you clean up the file format, I don't think I would really rely more on SimpleBIM.
When you filter out, like, is it enough, for example, to say that, okay, can you stick to IFC entities, to IFC classes? Like, if you can sort it by IFC classes and just, for example, you just hide or take away the MEP classes, would that help you? Is this kind of thing you are doing in SimpleBIM, or it's more nuanced, more detailed?
I would say the usage of SimpleBIM is quite simple. We have a plugin within SimpleBIM. So we just run that plugin on any IFC file format. And I do believe it's as simple as just having the IFC ducts, IFC furniture types, and strip it down to the most necessity parts of environmental studies. It should be really straightforward, and it should be really easy to do these things.
You can do that already in BlenderBIM. If you want, you can just, you have color by class, and you can just hide the classes that you don't want to. Let's say you want all the structural elements. If only that is important for you, and the windows and doors, then you can hide everything else, right? It's actually not so complicated. But yeah, it's in the first tab, in the general tab.
I've seen that a little bit for different tasks I've also tried to use BlenderBIM for. So unfortunately, I haven't played well enough to be confident in using that. But if it is possible to filter out, hide, and then export the IFC file format, it will be an interesting play for me to play around with this.
You can do that. If you know what you need to hide, you can do that. And it's actually the first time when you try, it will feel a bit weird. But if you play a few days, you'll get the grasp, and it's going to work very quick. And nowadays I use only this, and it's very, very simple. Like, the first thing I do, color by class, and I see what classes I have in my model. I see immediately if I have any building element proxies or things that I don't expect, right? You can hide first, but then there is a patch, I think, to export only the elements that you want. It's something definitely doable. Just that you need, I don't know, 2-3 hours to get used, maybe 1-2 hours to play a bit with that in the interface, see how it works, right? Because in the beginning, when I used it first time, when Dion released this feature first, I made a video, and I really made quite a fool of myself because I did not know how to use it, and I just recorded straight. I posted the video like that, but I learned some things. And since then, I asked him to put some things there, and he implemented those, and now it's much easier because it was a bit more difficult to select the objects. now you have like a cursor there, and you can just select like all the classes. Like if you select one class, one entity, and click on that cursor, you'll select all those elements in the model. And if you want to hide them, you just press Shift H and you hide all those elements, right? If you have like a MEP class or something like that, I definitely recommend have a look at that, because if you can do that, at the end of the day, you can even, if you want to go more crazier, you can even write a Python script with IFC on PowerShell that will keep for you only the classes or the entities that you want to have. But sometimes it's still good to check visually, right? Because you don't know, maybe you have something that is not classified correctly and so on. So you would still want to see like visually, okay, if I select each entity at a time, do I see any kind of errors in there? If not, you just go on, right? So I'm sure that you'll just need a few hours and you won't need to use Simple BIM anymore.
But I do think you are quite right by having like a first visual look. And by the way, the video you made was quite good actually for what it was intended to do, to showcase the color by IFC class. And shortly after you made that, I did use the IFC class by assisting a company we cooperate quite a lot with by determining cold bridges or thermal bridges in buildings. It's really easy to then like highlight beams or edges in a building by colors, and easy then determine, have I actually counted everything I need to highlight. But back to like the initial comment I wanted to have by IFC classes by color is often, or not often, sometimes when we as consultant engineer groups receive IFC file format, there will be errors in the model, and at times, if you want to import these IFC file formats into ARISE, you cannot do that because there is something with the file that is inaccurate. And if I play well enough with BlenderBIM, I might eventually train myself to change some of the IFC classes to bypass some of the issues I experience now and then. And I think that can be a game changer for our company and also in the industry, as the backup plan for inaccurate IFC file format is always the blueprint files. And to module up a whole building based on the blueprint file takes hours, and it's not always gonna yield the wished results on the budget you have, because you always is budget restrained on how many hours you do have. And then you have to eventually cut maybe the accuracy of your moduling by only partially module one side of the building or other elements of the building. So definitely IFC class, and eventually know how to change classes would be a real huge milestone.
That's really simple. In the object tab, right? In the object information is the second tab in the BlenderBIM. You just click on that pen right there and edit, and you choose the class that you want. So it's actually very, very straightforward. It definitely worthwhile to use 1-2 hours and look a bit, because the first time when you try it, I felt that I was completely out of my element. Like it was not user friendly, it was weird and so on. But right now, it's the first tool I go to when I want to check an IFC model. I don't open Solibri anymore. I go straight to BlenderBIM, and I'm still far away from, for example, what Dion does. Like if you see him in action, like you get dizzy. Like he's using so many shortcuts, and you can do actually so much more, right? Because you color by class, like that's simple, right? But you can also color by more things. Like you can go much, much more into detail. So it's definitely something that I am also looking to get more used to and learn more, because then you use the same things also for the information takeoff. So it's really, really cool, I think. I definitely need to make an update video for that, because now I'm much better. The improved user interface is also a huge improvement.
A milestone into the user friendliness of the software. And I would also say that maybe one of the things that I really appreciate with BlenderBIM, with the usage I have as described, it's basically two things: quanta of energy calculation, some bits you can use, and also abstraction elements. But at times when you either work in a separate environmentally program, it's not always as easy and intuitive to highlight changes from IFC file to IFC file to IFC file. The same with blueprints you receive, depending on like how you commit your work. I would say maybe the tool I use the most per now is the ISC diff tool within Blender BIM. I'm not so interested to see like, okay, the window have increased 2 millimeter or 3 millimeter height here and there. It's far easier to visualize all the changes. And depending on what my task is, I can then pinpoint exactly where's the change, what change do I need to pay attention to. And again, the colorization of changes between two IFC file formats has been maybe the most important aspects of BlenderBIM I use in my work right now.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you see any role that IDS could play in your workflow?
Could you elaborate the question a bit more?
So I'm using IDS to validate my models, right? I'm thinking like if you are looking for specific properties in your elements, in your objects, in the model, then IDS could be a very, very good thing because you could spot quite immediately. Actually, also for classification, right? You can spot very quickly. You can see if you have unclassified building element proxies, but you can do the same. Like if you are used to use a BlenderBIM interface, you are going to get that very easily with the color by class, right? So it doesn't really make sense only for that. But if you have specific information that you're looking for, that your elements should have, then IDS comes in very, very handy.
Indeed, I have had some project where we did daylight simulations for office space, and without any warning, the architects already defined what light transmission values the windows is supposed to have. They communicated one value to us, but certainly through like the use of BlenderBIM, I had an accident clicking into this information bits and system and like, okay, it's a different value now. We need to confirm with the architects how they changed the concept. And if so, what studies do we need to do now to verify, is it still within the building regulation or not? So I think for us who works within environmental studies, it is often the light transmission value, the U values for walls, and these are the information within like the components we are looking after. Elsewise, if it is daylight study, it is more like the geometry of the room and the courtyard, or how is the neighboring building affecting and impacting access to light, or also overheating due to direct sun. So these are like the information bits I would consider useful for my profession. Not necessarily all of the information, but definitely U values and the physical values are more impactful for me.
Yeah, well, that would be like really, really easy to check with an IDS. So you could very easily have a simple IDS to check for 2 or 3 properties, and you can spot very easily. Like if you have any elements that don't have that value. Now, if you know that the architect or who are you working with are providing that kind of information, which you can easily, you can check in 1-2 elements and see, yeah, okay, I have a U value here. So yeah, let me check the whole model, right? It would be easy, but you can do the same also from the same section in BlenderBIM. If you have only one value, then you can like 1 or 2, you can just go and filter by this property with this name. And you can see if you have any elements that don't have that. Why I love the IDS the most is because it's like a stamp, right? It goes through, like it's not like a visual check and you don't know how you document it or something like that. You run it, you get a report, and you get it green, red, and if it's red, with the details. Like this element doesn't have this property. I checked it at that date. This is what it means. You can use that in a valid documentation, right? So this is actually very, very strong, because until now, how did you check the information? Well, I'm checking like the table. It's correct. It's not, right? Here, there is no doubt. It's either green or red. It's so simple, right? So
like a good
I love it.
Exactly, like a good example is to support your comment is an ongoing project we are participating now in. And the most difficult part is when you have big scale projects in the city center, and this is in the city center of Oslo, where one part of the building is to be demolished, one part will be renewed, and another part will have an extension to floors. So you have a huge mix of old and new parts. And then you have the building physician report stating, okay, that part of the facade have a value X and the other facade have a value of Y. And when you're working in such a 2D environment, it can always lead to confusion or accidents where you're using inaccurate values within your energy simulation. In this case, it's energy related, and it can have a huge impact if your building passes the necessary energy requirements. And I would then also emphasize again with what you're saying, this is the link I'm trying to connect, is if we rather have an understanding everything is to be documented in a 3D environment, far easier to navigate which facade are meant to have which value, and you can visualize and see it clearly instead of interpreting between several PDF files, several audits of the blueprints, and it's always a hassle to like figure out which is the updated one, which is unusable at the moment. We run test cases because the initial guess is not meeting the requirements, and then you have a separate document on documents on documents to somehow fuse into the end result and end simulation. So what you are saying is heavily supported, at least from my side.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of time until more people will realize this, because with so little effort, actually, you can get so much value. I think one of the challenges is that a lot of people don't really realize this because we are used to just validate things in the way we have been doing it. Yeah, like for clashes, it's easier because you get it, right? You get like in Solibri, if you check with for a clash, you see it is there. It's something going through another thing and you have it. It's like an issue, right? You choose what you do with it. But when it comes to information, it's not as easy. And that's exactly what this the IDS does, right? And it's very simple. Like today, for example, I was checking some models and I needed to refine my IDS because I got some different properties. From starting point, I prepare for the check I want to check. I get a lot of errors, a lot of red in my model. And I look, okay, what was the issue here? Is my fault? Because sometimes maybe you did not choose the right thing in the IDS, right? Like, for example, in the beginning, I don't choose a data type for what I'm checking, the property that I'm checking, because I don't know what that is. Or I might choose text because most of the time it's a text value, IFC text. But when I check, like it may be an area or a volume or an integer or something like that, and I see that right quickly. And I adjust that in my IDS, I run it again, it's green, right? And I do that until either I get it green all, or I see, okay, no, this is an error. This information is missing from my model, right? That's so clean. And after doing that with my first model, then I do the same with all the others. And I'm very happy about this because today I had this. I don't do this very often. Like I get maybe models once every 2 weeks, depending on the time, the period, what we build and so on. But I think it's been like 2 or 3 weeks since last time I got, and now I got like close to 10 models. And I was so happy to brush up my IDS and look at it. And I just realized again, oh, I'm so happy for this tool being available right now for free.
It is. And
It's crazy.
I do think more industries also will eventually pay attention to SimpleBIM. I think one area that is heavily emphasized nowadays within any building codex is carbon footprint of buildings. And if you have an IFC file format from an architectural group, most likely will not have any of these information. So if you then spend like enough time as you do to define each bits and bobs, the quantity takes off and your initial CO2 guess will be far more accurate than to guess how much carbon footprint are in the wall, how much wall parts have concrete in it, etc., etc. So I heavily support what you're saying.
I'm very happy for this. You mentioned this because actually in Norway now, this becomes more and more important. Like from 2024, this thing will wait in the tendering phase, if I'm not mistaken, 30% how a tender, an offer will be evaluated. That's very nice to see that it's more important. And come on, let's be honest. Like we are talking about carbon footprint and so on, but digital twins and whatever, right? Everything is based in the model. If the quality of the model is trash, then you won't be able to do anything. So come on, people, wake up. We need to look at actually at the quality of the model, right? And IDS is the perfect tool to help with that, to use less time and not only less time, to really find the true state of the model, like a stamp, right? It's true or not? Like, it's so simple. This is going to be like a no-brainer value for clients who have buildings who require models delivered, because they can say, okay, look, here is my BIM execution plan, the exchange information requirements. These are my requirements for my project. And you have this in a PDF, in an Excel, whatever. And then, my guy, I have also an ideas file. So please, sir, take this with you. And before you send me any model, make sure that you run these ideas. And don't send it to me if it's not green 100%. So I think we'll get there someday. I don't know when, but I'm sure that some clients will get there sooner rather than later, because like that's the crazy value right there. It requires so little effort for the client, and they will save so much time, because you will save so much BCF communication. BCF will still play a role, but you will cut a lot of dead time, because the designer will need to, okay, like it's very simple actually to check, right? If I run the IDS when I'm modeling something and I say, okay, I forgot to actually to classify correctly my model. That's fine, no problem, right? Oh, I still have some building element proxies in my model. They should have been walls or slabs, or that's not correct. Oh, I forgot to have the fire rating in them. That's not a big deal, right? So things like this. And it will help a lot. Like if you want to calculate the CO2, then maybe you don't have the value, the proper value, like, but you have like the volume, right? You have the area, you have everything that you need to do that, right? Because there are other tools that take that information, that read that information, if it exists, right? And IDS plays a huge critical role here. Oh my God, I started to rumble. Let's go back to you. Sorry.
Yeah, but like it's okay. What you're saying is making me think in the direction of what's the likelihood of towards why we have inaccurate IFC or incomplete IFC file formats. And I will take a guess on how like the architect industry works. Right? Well, so if I'm wrong, please correct me. But for me, it seems like the architects are the one who communicates with all of the subtopics of buildings. So they have to communicate with the environmentalist study groups, which I belong to fire group and the water and pipes group. And they receive back all the needed changes they have to commit in their IFC file, send that backwards to all of the groups until everyone agrees on when is the file format good enough. And this can be by emails, and often is by emails with Excel charts and long text description of what's needed to change. So for me, it seems quite time consuming to take all of this information, do those changes is most likely Revit or Rhino or whatever tool they use, generate a new file, back, forward, dance movement. So for me, when I saw this GitHub collaboration tool, I thought to myself, oh, this is quite interesting. I would have loved to participate in a project where I, as the environmentalist study, can do my simulations, commit the necessary changes, which is just to be approved by an architect. So again, if you can fast forward all of these dance movements and streamline how are the information to be sent, I do think that is the contributional fact on how we can get the files to be more rich in details and have all of these information that we do need to complete all of the other subjects within the buildings. Unless we do these things, there's no time to do all of the changes, and there will always be something forgotten in the IFC file formats that needs to be audited in, and again, dance forward, move backward with the necessary target scripts. And then the end user gets his final product with an partially incomplete file format, partially filled in with maybe parts of the information that's needed and partially not. So I do hope to see more people, especially architects group and environmental groups, can use this GIF collaboration tool and test it out. Will this fasten the information flow? And if it's fastening information flow, how will the end result and end quality be? So that is like my take on your input.
You know what? I have no doubt that the architects or every other stakeholder on the project, they will have no choice, because the clients have the most to win from this. I see a lot of clients that will jump on this, because you would be surprised. I think the way that the models are verified, like the metadata is verified today, It's not actually really happening. Maybe only if you have a contractor that needs to build based on the model, but that's not happening all the time. So yeah, this is my thesis. Will sound harsh, but to be honest, I think the way the metadata is checked today, if that is happening at all, let's say that it's very, very error prone because you don't have the stamp. Like maybe you have clients like StatsBig, maybe even Baninur, I'm not sure, but maybe StatsBig is using MVD XML, or some clients are using maybe something like Anchor. So maybe you have few people using that, but the majority of the clients in the industry, I'm telling you that they are not really checking their metadata in their models. Like it's going to be a huge jump from no check to something that is 100% accurate. Like that, you can spot that. Like that's exactly what happened in my case. Because like I was not actually really checking that information. It's very difficult to check. Like if you get a lot of huge models to check, how do you check it if not just visually, right? How do you know that is correct? Like it's impossible. Yeah, you check visually a bit some things, but how much can you do it?
Exactly. And I do think to enhance like what you're saying, the end goal by having a high quality data file is that you can reproduce the same result by any type of studies, regardless if it is environmental studies or CO2 footprint. Every time you're hitting the calculate button, it should yield the same result, regardless what computer you are on or what initial guest engineer or the architect does. So today we are not there. We are and will get day and night differences in the results. And the impact of the industry have on this is that I'm sure, unfortunately, clients are getting a half-paid job done because of some errors or some mistakes or initial guess that's inaccurate.
Well, I'm very excited about that because this is a huge opportunity. And now with the push for the carbon footprint and so on, like I am very, very, very optimistic about the IDS adoption, at least in Norway. I don't know about other countries because I don't know how much the role the models are playing across the whole process. But I'm sure that here we are going to see a lot of clients using IDS in a very near future. Yeah. Now that's cool. Let's go back to you a bit, what you are doing actually. Like, how is your day of work? Like, are you working like in tens of projects or do you have like a longer role in a one project? Like, are you working with a client for longer or usually you have more clients that you work with during a week, a day and so on?
I think if I can take it to like an annual example,
okay,
per year, we have roughly 130 different tasks we do, and it can be anything from big projects to really small, simple dwelling spaces. So a typical day for me is to distinguish if it is, say, daylight calculations. If it is dwelling, it is blueprint based. I take my blueprint tool and measure up the necessary square meters. If it is office spaces, then it's more advanced calculation needed. But the common thread is always that I need an IFC file format. I need to have some dimensions known. If it is a high quality model that I receive, I am more efficient calculating the needed glass amount, windows amount. If it is an inaccurate model, even if I click like on a window, I get inaccurate dimension of the window. If that's the case, there's more manual input needed to be done. You need to manually check all the dimension of all windows, all balcony doors, etc. In the end of the day, you do have some results, and then you present those results to the architect groups that you have too little or too much heat loss or heat gain from the windows. You need to consider some changes, and these are the changes I recommend you to do. And if you are lucky, you can get like a quick response. Yeah, I approve these changes you are asking me to do, and then you just update your model or hand calculations, and then you are more or less done with that tasks. The more complex one is always the times where we do daylight calculations in combination with thermal comfort, in combination with energy, because the only way to meet daylight requirement is to always have more window. That's the only way you can resolve that. More window means you have more heat gain during summers and heat loss in
During
winters.
winters.
And then you always have either more heating or more cooling. So those tasks are always the more fulfilling one because you're working with all of your topics in the same projects. So you are now the expert who's meant to take on 3 different roles and assist the either developer or the architect firm. So I would say that is like my day-to-day work.
Regarding the tools that you are using, we mentioned that you are using BlenderBIM, SimpleBIM, and the other one, Aegis, or how do you call it?
We mainly use IDEs for environmental studies, but we also use SketchUp with the plugin called DL Luminaire, which is a French plugin for facade studies, such as like heat on facades, sun hours on the facade, etc. So we are quite experimental in my company at Marini Consulting, and we're trying to be so we can find the accurate tool for the task at hand. Sometimes we find our eyes not to be sufficient enough or not advanced enough or have too many simplifications. So then we are relying on other tools. And I do think now that I've found that VI suits can work quite well. I can be more in the BlenderBIM environment and stay in that environment and thus reduce the amount of tools I am using. The more tools we have, the more training you have to have across all the different platforms. And that is in itself quite frustrating that you are only using a fraction of that software's potential just to, let's say, take out the obstructional elements to then import it into SketchUp, only to be imported into IDEs. So for me, BlenderBIM and the open source community allows me to do more tasks within the same software, and that is more efficient. And eventually, I do think we can also cut down on license costs because all of these licenses have a high cost per user. So it is also maybe more noticeable for smaller companies onto why should you use BlenderBIM.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's so true. I'm wondering about something. I don't know how the role of a ladybug plays in here, but is this a tool that you could use for what you do, or is that tool is for something else?
Ladybug has some environmentalist tools. Since it's not supporting of Blender for now, I think it last was supported with the 3.2 edition or something of Blender. It had some studies regards to wind diagrams and sun hours on the facade, but in the Ladybug environment, and I'm sure you're referring to like the Grasshopper community, you have a different plugin which is the same as I'm working mostly with daylights. So I would hope that both Lady Tool and I think it's Ladybug, is that what the other tool is, can be developed more into the IFC structure of BlenderBIM. If I may point one disadvantage currently with the VI suits for Blender is that for now is a specific like slash sign in the IFC file naming, which is not a legal character. So you have to change all objects name to use it within Blender. So it is a bit counterintuitive that you want to use BlenderBIM and have all of the IFC slash properties of walls, windows, etc. But you have to edit them out somehow. And since you also have to then store that file in a Blender file format to run the environmental studies, you're going away from BlenderBIM. So I would hope that with development of Ladybug and the tool sets around Ladybug, we can rather fully work within the IFC file format, as often as an environmental study is needed to do is to change dimension of room height, room width, room depth, window, sill height, and the parametric changes you can do within BlenderBIM is perfect for this. But as soon as you go away from an IFC file format into the Blender file format, I think the connection links to use this is disconnected, and you can no longer use the parametric changes so easily. So I do hope that Ladybug can soon be worked upon more. and also fine tune to fully be compatible with BlenderBIM and the IFC standard.
Yeah. Well, the best thing you could do about this, it would be to open an issue on GitHub and describe like what you think. And I think the guys can take it from there, like because everything starts there, like with an idea. And if there are more people engaged in the request, then the developers will use some time on that at some point. It's no guarantee, of course, as it is with an open source project, but there is a higher chance than zero if you start there. So
yeah, I do think also the community of us who have my type of specialty, we need to be more loud and clear. As I can recall from the forum, it is Max from Equa, me, and like a third guy who commented like the need for these environmental tools. So if there are more people who are within the industry and quite passive in the open source community pages, it is needed to join forces to show what the need is and also inquire these tools. And by the way, it's Honeybee. Honeybee is the tool name.
Honeybee, okay, Honeybee.
Yeah. Honeybee, Ladybug, Honeybee, Dragonfly. So there's like the whole different tool set for Grasshopper. But in any case, it is the need for more voices that we do wish to have these tools. And I would love to see if there can potentially also be a showcase project where we use all of the integrated tools with the GitHub collaboration tool to showcase. We have the whole line of production represented into one model and fully digital information flow. As I do think the sale point to use these tools is always to cut down the information flow to be more linear and more efficient. I think also is like the selling point we have to have.
Makes sense. Is there a message would you like to send now at the end?
Yeah, I do think a need for anyone, regardless of background, is to be curious. We are all trained professionals within our own locked environmental systems with the software we use, but be more curious. Is there other tools that can bypass some of the restraints you experience? Is there other tools that can make your life easier, then explore those opportunities? And I would say the best community to be in is by far now the open source community of BlenderBIM, as it is always an active community willing to answer questions or elaborate possible solutions to what you experience. So that will be my last shout out.
How can people reach out to you if they want to ask you anything?
I'm quite reachable by LinkedIn. All my contact details are there, email, phone, or just LinkedIn messages. So if there are anything I can assist, I'm always happy to be there.
Awesome. Thank you very much for joining. It was very nice to learn something about an aspect of the design process that I'm not very exposed to. Thank you for sharing everything.
You're welcome. If there are more I can assist within this topic, I'm happy to do a secondary talk with you with like show and tell another time.
Definitely. Hopefully we will get some more development on the support for these kind of things inside BlenderBIM. That would be amazing.